ready to like finally ditch those good intentions and actually make positive changes, make them stick this time.
Absolutely.
This is your deep dive into building better habits,
Love it.
one step at a time.
Yes.
And, we're going to be looking at this sort of classic advice, 5 tips for cultivating positive habits, and really breaking it down to like, you know, make it work for us.
Yeah. I think what's interesting about this kind of advice is that people have been giving variations on it for years.
Right.
And yet we still struggle with it.
Yeah.
So clearly there's something in like the nitty-gritty of like how you actually implement it
Totally.
that makes all the difference.
Well, and I think so much of it comes down to, like you said, we've heard it before.
Right.
We think we know what to do, but like when we get to the actual doing and the doing it consistently over time, that's where we hit the roadblocks.
That's the hard part. It's that consistency. Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right, well, let's dive in.
Let's do it.
So tip number 1 from this, 5 tips for cultivating positive habits is all about starting small.
Yes.
Which, again, sounds very simple. We've heard it before.
It's true, though.
But why is that so important?
It's so important because our brains, they only have so much bandwidth.
Yeah.
And when we try to change everything at once,
yeah.
it's overwhelming.
New Year's resolutions, anyone.
Exactly.
It's like that January 1st hit, and it's like, new me, new everything. And then by like January 15th, you're like, well, back to the same old habit.
Back to the drawing board.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how do we avoid that?
So by starting with one tiny habit, what you're doing is you're giving your brain a chance to actually like encode that habit.
Got it.
So every time you repeat an action, you're carving a neural pathway in your brain.
Okay.
Focus on one path at a time, and it becomes a superhighway, much faster. And actually, there's research that suggests that 66 days of consistent repetition in the same context can actually make a huge difference.
66 days.
66 days.
Yeah. So it's not going to happen overnight.
No,
Okay.
that's a process.
The 66 days is a lot shorter than I feel like we sometimes make it out to be in our head.
Yeah.
Or at least I do.
Yeah, well, because we have this like fantasy that it should be this instant transformation.
Right.
And it doesn't really work that way.
Okay, that's good to know. So we pick our one habit, our one small habit. We give ourselves 66 days, the same context every time. Hopefully by the end of that, it's starting to feel a little more natural, a little more automatic.
Exactly.
But then how do we like actually wire it into our brains?
Yes. This is where it gets interesting.
Right. Because it's one thing to like, I don't know, cross it off to-do list or whatever.
Right, because we've all had those to-do lists.
Way too many to-do lists. So how do we make it actually happen?
So this is where the clever bit of what they call habit stacking comes in.
Habit stacking. I like that.
Right. It even sounds cool.
Yeah, it does.
So you're already wired for certain routines, right?
Yes, hopefully.
Okay. So brushing your teeth, that first cup of coffee in the morning?
Second cup of coffee, let's be honest.
There we go.
Yeah.
That's the one.
Yeah.
So the idea is you connect the new habit to an existing one.
Okay.
So, for example, tell yourself, after I brush my teeth, I will spend 5 minutes meditating.
Okay.
So that existing routine becomes your brain's cue to launch the new behavior.
It's like a mental sticky note.
Exactly.
But way more effective.
Much more effective.
I love that. Okay, so we're being realistic. We're starting small.
Yes.
We're stacking those habits.
Yes.
But what about like actually seeing the progress?
Oh, yeah.
Because, I can make all the plans, I can set it all up, but sometimes I need a little bit of that visual.
A visual reminder.
Yeah.
That you're making progress. And this is where, we come to tip #3, tracking your progress.
Okay.
And so many people skip this step where they think it's not important.
Oh,
But
it's huge. It's huge.
it's so satisfying to like check off that box or like see, whatever your method is, but to just visually see like, oh, I'm on day 15 or I've done this 3 times this week.
Absolutely. And you know what? It's not just about, that kind of like feel-good moment. There's actually psychology behind it.
Oh, really?
Tracking keeps you accountable, first of all.
Okay.
But it also helps you spot patterns.
Okay.
So let's say you're trying to go to the gym more often.
Right.
And you're tracking it. And you notice a pattern that maybe you're more likely to skip the gym after a particularly stressful workday.
Okay.
That's valuable information.
It is.
Because then you can start to say, okay, well, what can I do on those stressful work days to either mitigate the stress so that I still feel up to going to the gym?
Right. Or can I adjust my gym schedule so that maybe I don't go on those days?
Okay, so it's really about like working with ourselves, understanding our patterns, and like
Sure.
not just trying to be some perfect robot that's like, oh, this is the schedule, it has to happen this way.
Because we're not robots.
No. Sadly, as much as sometimes I think, oh, just make it automatic.
Right. Just program me.
But that doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
So we're tracking our progress, we're noticing the patterns, we're giving ourselves grace, which leads us to tip number 4, which is be patient.
Yes. Be patient. This is so important.
Because we're human.
We are human. And, life happens.
Yes.
And you're going to have days where you're not perfect. You might even fall completely off the wagon.
Oh, for sure.
But the key is to not let that derail you completely.
Okay, yeah.
So give yourself grace.
Right.
Remember that you're not defined by, one slip up.
Right.
And that it's about progress, not perfection.
Love that. Okay, so how do we, like, from a scientific standpoint, as we were talking about the neural pathways, we're talking about 66 days.
Right.
How does that patience play into actually allowing the habit to form?
So it's all about what they call the habit loop, right?
Yeah.
So there's a cue, there's a routine, and then there's a reward.
Okay.
And that loop needs repetition to become automatic.
Okay.
And sometimes it needs weeks or even months of repetition before it really sinks in.
Okay.
So you have to be patient with yourself and you have to celebrate the small wins, not just the finish line. Because those small wins are actually what's rewiring your brain.
That's a good reminder. It's so easy to get caught up in like, oh, but I'm not there yet, or I haven't achieved X, Y, or Z.
Right. We're so focused on the outcome that we forget to enjoy the journey.
Yes. And speaking of enjoying the journey, that leads us to our final tip, which is reward yourself,
Yes.
which I love.
That's the fun part.
Right. This is a fun part. But again, I think there's a way to do it really well and a way to do it, maybe not so well.
Right.
So tell me about the rewards.
Okay. So our brains, just like we've been saying, they're wired to seek pleasure and repeat actions that are associated with it.
Makes sense.
Right. So the idea with rewarding yourself is you're building those positive associations intentionally.
Okay.
So let's say you're trying to build a habit of writing every morning. You could reward yourself afterward with a fancy coffee.
Ooh, I like that.
Right. Or maybe you get to listen to your favorite podcast while you work out if you're trying to build that exercise habit.
Yes.
Make the reward meaningful to you, something that you genuinely enjoy, and it actually reinforces the habit loop on a neurological level.
Oh, that's so interesting. Okay, so it's almost like, we talked about that cue at the beginning, right? Like, okay, it's after my cup of coffee or it's after I brush my teeth.
Right.
And now it's like at the end, we're also giving ourselves that little cue, that little reward to solidify the habit.
It's like, okay,
Yeah.
I've done this good thing for myself.
Yes.
Now it's time for the reward.
I love that. Okay, so to kind of recap everything we've talked about today, because this has been so much good information.
Yeah.
It really has. We've got our 5 tips for cultivating those positive habits, and it really does seem like you said at the beginning, it comes down to really understanding how it all works together. So we're starting small.
One habit at a time.
One habit. We're
Yeah.
giving ourselves 66 days. We're really using that same context, whatever that looks like for us, every single time, because that's going to help it become a little bit more hardwired, a little bit more automatic.
Yeah.
We're going to stack that habit.
We are.
We're going to connect it to something that we already do, something that's already ingrained in our routine, because again, that's going to help solidify it. It's going to give us that cue. We're going to track our progress because that's going to help us stay accountable. It's going to help us notice any patterns, and it's just going to give us that little boost.
Absolutely.
And then we are going to be patient because this is about progress, not perfection. And then at the end, we get to reward ourselves.
Yes.
So what a great system. I'm excited. I hope this is encouraging for you listening as well. Take this and apply it because it really can make a difference.
It really can. And the beautiful thing is that it can be applied to any area of your life.
Oh, that's so true.
Whether it's, your health, your relationships, your work, whatever it is that you want to improve, these principles can really make a difference.
Okay. So as always, it's not just about the information, it's about actually putting it into practice.
Yes.
So I'm curious for you listening, what is that one habit that you want to focus on?
Yeah. What's your one habit?
And how can you use these tips to make it stick?
I love that.
Choose the habit, find its place in your routine, and get ready to track those wins and reward yourself at the end.
And celebrate those wins.
Yeah.
Celebrate them.
Amazing.
Have that reward. You've earned it.
Exactly. Well, this has been another deep dive.
Another good one.
As always, so glad to chat with you.
Likewise.
And we'll see you next time for another deep dive.
Bye.